It's insoluble, for man or machine. It's still evolving, still raising questions, still courting controversy.
It's very strange, but it was innovative, and McGowan had a big TV following. He was a big star.
I am not a number. I am a person.
There was definitely a sense that this was going to be different. It wasn't just another ITC show.
It's weird. I mean, which one of you?
I am the original. He is the economy pack.
Well, because it's absorbing, intriguing, and strangely mesmeric.
Maybe I could help.
Pawn to Queen's 4.
How?
Pawn to Queen's 4.
How?
Pawn to Queen's 4.
Never before has a program challenged the conventions of television with such audacity as The Prisoner.
I feel the violation of the power of the less.
Never before has a series managed to enchant and infuriate the sensibility of the viewer.
That's it.
Take.
That's it.
Take.
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 40 years on, the program refuses to be confined, intimidated, or to fade away.
Right from the beginning, one felt this is something odd and clever. Yeah, inventive, if you like. Creative. Original.
But then you see it was experimental. I mean, I think the main curiosity was that each episode was totally different.
There wasn't one specific direction for you to understand. You could look at the series and think, oh, I get that bit, and someone else say, well, I get that bit, well, it doesn't match that bit. It doesn't matter. Everyone's got a different opinion.
It clearly hasn't aged. In fact, it's something that's impossible to place in any time because it evolves continuously.
We thought you would feel happier as yourself.
The issues The Prisoner raised in 1967 are as contemporary as anything occurring in the 21st century.
Just fill in your race, religion, hobbies, what you like to read, what you like to eat, what you were, what you want to be, any family illnesses, any politics.
Now, I think people are certainly much more aware of the issues it raised. They're more evident, people are more aware of them, and they're still with us.
It was a very intriguing premise, and it also had ramification with us all. As society tumbles apart from time to time, or we wonder who's watching us for what reason. You see all the CCTV cameras, whether it's on the roads or whether it's in the streets. You think, oh my goodness, we're all becoming members of the same village.
I will not be pushed, filed, stamped, indexed, briefed, debriefed, or numbered.
We're not talking about people's snatched away to hidden places in South Wales or wherever Portmeirion is actually meant to be, wherever the village is. We're all in the village.
Despite the passage of time, The Prisoner retains its individuality and, by association, its phenomenal fan base. Quite simply, there's never been anything like it.
Don't knock yourself out.
To trace the genesis of The Prisoner, one must start with Patrick Joseph McGowan. Born 19th of March 1928 in New York, McGowan was raised in Ireland before his family settled in the UK. After trying out a variety of vocations, McGowan settled on a career in acting. He had all the right attributes to progress: young, attractive, instinctive, and bursting with talent. It wasn't long before his name was presenting itself across the casting desks and charm schools of the UK. Granted, there were other contenders looking for breaks, but they lacked something that McGowan had, and that something was intrigue.
McGowan was an extraordinary actor. There was always this almost like a volcano about to erupt.
Danger. Wonderful thing to have if you're an actor. You've got to be dangerous because it's very powerful. And he had danger. And his danger was he had this split in his personality. He would just as soon come and thump you as be nice to you. You never knew what to expect.
You always felt there could be an explosion. And very few actors have this. He had it, And it was the sheer force of his personality and this underlying explosiveness.
Well, you're in my country now. Well, the diplomatic immunity. I like travel. It broadens the...
But anything that Pat did was fast-moving, because the energy that came off him was enormous, blistering energy, wonderful. You had to be on your toes immediate, front foot, or he'd have you.
But he was vibrant, enormously exciting, but the energy level was just fantastic.
It's very nice working with really, really good actors. I mean, some of these shows, the actors aren't always, they're good looking and they're tall, but Pat was really a wonderful, well, still is, a wonderful actor.
You never could take a hint.
I don't want a hint. I want you.
I would liken him to an actor who is now dead called Ian Hendry, and I thought those two actors had a style which would be absolutely right now. I think their acting style was before their time. They were totally real. There was no playing to the camera, no thought about being glamorous or charming, or they were absolutely straight, very truthful actors, and I think Patrick was.
I believed in him. I thought he had a remarkable talent. He was an outstanding personality. He was the best leading man we had in the country at that time.
He had that ability to really look at you, and not everybody has. When he looked at you, he properly looked. He didn't just sort of take your face in.
Patrick was wonderful to work with because, A, he knew exactly what he wanted. Having described what it was, he then left you to your own devices.
Which makes more sense to me that Patrick was in a party at the end of Danger Man, and somebody in the government had approached him and said, so what does a secret agent do when he's retired? Meaning the actor. And Patrick, the way Patrick is, inquiring, said, well, what do they do with secret agents when they retire? And he said, oh, we take care of them. We give them a house, we give them some pocket money and a car, and we look after them. That way they won't defect, and we keep everything secret.
I found with hindsight that many, many other things in Pat McGowan's mind, or maybe not, led to the shape of The Prisoner. For instance, I was really pleased to be working on an episode which featured the very, very distinguished British movie star Eric Portman as number 2. But it wasn't until at the National Film Theatre in London I saw a film called The Spider and the Fly, which stars Eric Portman as an interrogator trying to catch a ruthless and elusive jewel thief. When I realized that the last line said by Eric Portman in The Spider and the Fly must have had quite an effect on Pat McGowan, because he raised his hand upwards and just said, be seeing you.
Even before a script was written, an appropriately confining location was required. They didn't have to look far for inspiration. During shooting for the first series of Danger Man, the production crew had visited North Wales to capture some exterior shots. As some episodes required exotic backgrounds, it was decided to utilise the village of Portmeirion on the fringes of Snowdonia to double for the scenery. Hidden within the perimeters of its own bay, Portmeirion was the dream of architect errant Sir Clough Williams-Ellis.
Portmeirion was actually built by Clough Williams-Ellis from 1925 till 1976. He was an architect and was from this area originally. And his reason for building it was that he wanted to actually show in physical form how you could develop a naturally beautiful place without defiling it.
The architect had long harboured a vision that architecture could easily compete with the beauty of nature if imagination was employed.
And he spent about 20 years looking for the perfect location. And this was really his plaything, but also it had a serious intention in that it was propaganda for seamley development. And that was one of the reasons behind it all.
And I remember asking him why had he built this strange village. And he said, well, as a young man, I fell in love with Portofino in Italy. It was too far away to carry on a serious affair, so I built my own Portofino in Wales, and that's why. And it was a kind of a never-never land, ideal for the prisoner location.
He was a keen amateur sailor, sailed around the coast of Italy and southern France, and saw in those areas the vernacular architecture embellishing the national countryside. And so he felt here that it was a typically Mediterranean type environment in terms of the topography and the seascape, the mountains beyond, and he'd play up to this quirk of nature and give the buildings a bit of a flavour of the south.
Using an Italianate approach as a base, Williams-Ellis incorporated an eclectic range of buildings which were built in simpatico with the surrounding landscape. The result was remarkable, and the village soon garnered a reputation as a retreat of unusual splendour. Architectural beauty aside, what appealed to McGowan was Portmeirion's otherworldly ambience, which appeared tailor-made for the series. With several exploratory recces undertaken, the project was duly presented to Lew Grade. Although still filming Danger Man, McGowan was confident that Grade would be amenable to his new plans. McGowan met with Grade at his office in the spring of 1966.
He came to see me, showed me the photographs of the beautiful place in Wales, told me the idea. I said, let's go. And when I was in America, I was with the president and the chairman of CBS. I told them the idea, and they bought it. Then I went straight ahead.
Not wanting to alienate one of his principal stars, Grade readily acquiesced to McGowan's concept, and the new series went into immediate production. McGowan assured Grade that the crew from Danger Man would switch their attentions over to the new series, which was to be called The Prisoner.
Lew's trust of Patrick allowed him to develop the show. But it was a very strange show to understand because it had never been done this way. It was Patrick was challenging the whole television industry by going beyond the norm. We weren't going to make The Saint, we weren't going to make The Avengers, we weren't going to make Man in a Suitcase. These were all similar shows.
Production was left to McGowan and Tomlin's newly formed company, Everyman Films. Although Grade was keen to allow Everyman Films a free hand in production duties, his advisers insisted that a more established figure was required to keep order.
So on The Prisoner, they brought in Leslie Gilliatt. Leslie Gilliatt wanted to go down to Portmeirion, where Patrick had shot before on Danger Man series. Well, you know, when I was down there with him, I sensed immediately that this is not going to work with him and Pat. Because he was too cynical, he was skeptical about the whole show. And as a producer, you can't be that. I mean, you either marry it or you get away. You can't be there second guessing.
One morning Leslie was there. That afternoon he was gone. Nobody knew why. And it was only, that was in September, when I went to Folkestone to work with Don Chaffee. We were chatting one day and I said to him, do you know why Leslie Gilliatt left? And he said, now this is Don Chaffee, Leslie pointed out a lot of the problems that have now become apparent. And this was not received too favourably, and he was off.
I knew it was going to be a short-lived relationship, and the two of them would never get on, never in a million years. And I think that's more about Patrick, like, why do I have, it's my idea, I'm taking responsibility financially to Lew Grade, I'm taking responsibility of my career by making this series, which could completely fail and kill me off forever, as an untrustworthy, not unmutual, but an untrustworthy filmmaker. And so why do I need to have a person in conflict? Why do I have to have a person who doesn't strictly believe in it? Why do I need that voice going to Lew's ear?
Although early documentation reveals that John Drake's character was to be maintained from Danger Man, McGowan was adamant that the character of Number 6 had no relation to his previous alter ego.
And he wasn't playing the same character. I mean, I haven't seen Danger Man for a very long time, but I do remember when we did The Prisoner, I thought to myself, that's very clever, because you could, if you're just playing a straight man, there's very little to tag on to, and I think Pat did alter the persona quite a lot.
Who's number 6 is no mystery. I mean, he was a secret agent called Drake who quit. So, I mean, that was no mystery.
We all knew at the end of Danger Man, publicly, that there weren't going to be any more Danger Man shows, so what would be so unusual about a secret agent retiring? You would just attach the two.
When I joined it, on the continuity sheets, instead of P for prisoner, which is what it became, it still said Drake.
And even in the opening titles, when you see the X's go across the photograph, that's a John Drake photograph. So it's probably all about copyright issues and ownership and royalties and money.
In the public's mind at the time, it was like the old Danger Man was now caught in this situation.
As it was a formality that McGoohan would assume the role of number 6, the most enduring element of the run would be his ongoing battle with number 2. With number 1's identity held back until the series climax, this frequently revolving conflict added greatly to the ambiance of the story. Equally, it would allow for a choice actor to guest alongside McGoohan each week.
But I think that the number 2s were always the people who made sure the prisoners didn't escape, or made sure that he didn't escape.
It was a very brilliant idea, actually, because the whole premise for each episode was, will this number 2, this week's number 2, succeed where the others have failed in cracking this man's psyche?
A one man against the rest story. One man against the next number 2, to be precise.
It is so illogical to have all these number 2s coming from somewhere, going nowhere, and so the audience had to try and make logical a totally illogical situation and make it logical for them. And that's some of the mystique.
It had to be different number 2s, otherwise the show would have got boring. I mean, that was the worry of the finance guys and the networks in the States was, it's very unusual to see a show where a guy fails at the end of each show. Because every show, normally he wins and beats up all the baddies and everyone lives happily ever after. In the Prisoner series, he never gets out. So that's a downer. So if you have the same number 2 all the way through, they're both downers. So you can't have 2 downers. You can't have a guy who fails to brainwash him and break him down, or neither can you have Patrick not getting out. So that would have been a killer.
Pat didn't want anybody to know why they changed. Just another number 2 appeared. And I think part of it was the fear thing, putting everybody on edge.
He toyed with the idea of bringing back 1 or 2 number 2s, but wisely, and avoiding this craze for bringing back anything that tickles the public's fancy for the first time, obviously ignoring the famous theatrical axiom, always leave them wanting more. Patrick didn't ignore that, and they still want more.
All the number 2s are very English. Maybe looking back, we should have had some foreigners there, because it makes me feel it's the British government all the time. You know, they're very English. George Baker, Peter Wingard, Guy Dolman. I mean, they're all very English, very educated. Leo McKern.
Outside of McGoohan, only the diminutive figure of Angelo Muscat could ever be considered as a regular on The Prisoner. The 4'3" actor was cast as the subservient butler, whose loyalty to each incumbent number 2 was unswerving. Although Peter Swanwick would become an occasional presence in the village's control room, any notion of a permanent cast was never pursued. Although it was originally planned that each guest, number 2, would introduce themselves over the series titles, the practice was never maintained. As a result, Robert Rietti, a voiceover artist possessed with an authoritative tone, was employed to make the bulk of number 2's introductions.
Where am I?
In the village.
What do you want?
Information.
Whose side are you on?
That will be telling. We want information. Information. Information.
You won't get it.
By hook or by crook, we will.
Who are you?
The new number 2.
Who is number 1?
You are number 6.
I am not a number. I am a free man.
A comprehensive introduction was conceived to run at the beginning of each episode. In preparation for this, a host of sites in London were earmarked as number 6's environment prior to his incarceration. Exteriors from outside the Palace of Westminster and adjacent car park were outlined for filming, as were corridors and doorways from Hyde Park's underground car park. These sequences dovetailed into the office where the prisoner's resignation would take place. Given the circumstances later on, it was highly prophetic that script editor George Markstein occupied the seat behind the desk for this sequence.
Really presaged the relationship as it was going to be between them, because there's George Markstein sitting at the desk and Magoon comes in and starts banging it and the cup going up like that. That was George and Patrick.
Equally ironic was the choice of number 6's London residence, number 1, Buckingham Place, in Victoria. Alighting from a custom-made Lotus 7 car outside the house, McGowan would then walk through the door of his property before the gassing that took him to Portmeirion. McGowan took a particular interest in the series theme tune.
Now, the theme tune was pretty interesting because you had 3 pretty good composers having a go at it. So you kicked off with Bob Farnan, who did it before I turned up, in fact. It wasn't very good. If you ever listen to it, it's pretty grim. And so no wonder they went on to Wilfred Josephs, who had also done I, Claudius, which was absolutely brilliant. And in fact, I think his contribution was one of the best. But sadly, because his theme tune wasn't taken up, he was ousted by Ron Grainer, who turned up and produced what was actually a very weak theme tune. And it wasn't until Pat got into the box with him. The orchestra was on one side of it, and he got him to come into this box, and I could see him going on and on and on at Ron Grainer. You've got to beef it up. You've got to beef it up.
By September 1966, Portmeirion had been transformed into the village. To aid the deception, scores of extras from the local area were employed as residents, with a brief to look suitably nonchalant at their imprisonment. Soon, Portmeirion took on a carnival atmosphere, as penny-farthing bicycles and customised mini-mokes hurtled around the village. Still operating as a commercial enterprise for the duration of the shoot, day visitors to Portmeirion were carefully shepherded around as filming took place.
I guess I was about 7 or 8 at the time it was filmed here. So my sister and I, we used to rush around watching them filming it and getting in the way, probably tripping over the cables and so on.
And then I saw these people wandering around, you know, paying a lot of money for their bed and breakfast. And I went, we can't come in and take this place over and tell these people to get out of the way. And they're not allowed to bring their cars in. They're going to have to park them up at the top of the hill and walk all the way down. I mean, a lot of them have a heart attack walking on the way back up, but there was no taxi service. I mean, we were going to ask for a lot.
Exteriors for 4 episodes were scheduled to be shot during September. These were later known as Arrival, Free for All, Dance of the Dead, and Checkmate, with the option of shooting scenes for The Chimes of Big Ben, if time allowed.
Well, I think that The Prisoner wouldn't really have been The Prisoner without Portmeirion. I think that McGowan's idea for the series and Clough's sort of architecture did go hand in glove, and I think that McGowan and Clough respected one another's ideas and what they were trying to do respectively, and they got on quite well together.
Utilising the full vista of Portmeirion, the crew shot numerous sequences in and around the village's perimeters. Ironically, some of the properties appeared purpose-built for the task. Number 6's house was a tiny one-roomed shop that looked onto Portmeirion's main square. Close by, Number 2's residence, the Green Dome, looked majestically over the entire estate. Portmeirion's hotel was transformed into the Old People's Home, while the village's baronial hall ably doubled for the series' town hall.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. And what a lovely day it is. Rise and shine, rise and shine.
To maintain a bittersweet ambiance around the village, the wonderfully gushing tones of Fenella Fielding were employed as an announcer. Her duties included reading the weather forecast, informing residents of the nightly curfew, and revealing the flavour of the day's ice cream.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. Can you paint? Can you draw? Can you model in clay?
If you can, then your day is just 6 weeks today. More about this later, but now, music.
Patrick wanted me to sound like somebody at a holiday camp. People who get you up first thing in the morning. Bright and breezy, but a bit sinister, you know. I mean, that amount of sort of vivacious noise at that time of morning is so frightening, isn't it?
As McGowan's character would be hell-bent on escaping, a menacing warder had to be employed to foil his attempts. The creative minds of MGM's production crew were charged with producing something suitably intimidating. With time of the essence, designers took McGowan's nebulous instructions and produced a machine, which came to be known as Rover.
Rover was, this thing in the script which was something that Number 2 could use to track anybody that tries to leave. So I said to Patrick, what's Rover? He goes, well, it climbs up walls, it can go across the ocean, it can travel across anything. I said, Pat, I don't know what that is.
Reading the script, Rover seemed to be almost a kind of a flying saucer. It was something way out of this world.
As far as the ocean's concerned, I think we should get like a miniature hydrocraft, and at least that'll go across the sand into the water. As far as the land's concerned, I don't know. So I got involved with all these special effects guys, and they all came up with an idea that we didn't get a chance to see in the studio. It was delivered on location in front of hundreds of local people, the entire film crew, and it was demoralizing.
While on paper the device appeared frightening enough, in reality a go-kart with a flashing light on top was never going to inspire terror. Nonetheless, with the shooting already underway at Portmeirion, Rover was duly sent up to the location.
And eventually it turned up, and it was unbelievable.
There was this horrible, round, cream-coloured cake with a stupid blue light on top.
It was essentially a cart, one of these that you use for kart racing, with a framework over it. And on top of this framework was a huge thing like a skull cap, made of rubber, and with a skirt touching the ground. Again, the hovercraft idea.
And that's when Patrick, David and I just died. I mean, we just were so embarrassed. I mean, this is futuristic, this is it. So, in my enthusiasm to see if it would work, I said, I'll climb inside this stupid cake and try and drive this go-kart.
There was another problem. There was a small hole in the front of this dome for Rover. And the question was, could you see the driver?
And then when I got inside, I couldn't see anywhere. I couldn't see where I was going. So I tried to start this go-kart up and go forward a few feet and skids and make it turn around.
But the trouble was he went down bouncing from side to side. And I said to him, Bernie, why were you bouncing from side to side? And he said, because I couldn't see where I was going. The hole is too small.
I was nearly dying in there with fumes. I got out and just said, this is ridiculous. This is totally ridiculous.
With the tightest of shooting deadlines, the general consensus was to scrap the machine immediately.
It has been given out, both by Patrick McGowan and others, that the reason it dropped was when it was put into water, it didn't float. It was never put into water, because you only had to look at it. There was no sea under. There was no flooring in it. The moment you put it into water, it would have gone right down.
So we were very much in trouble, because we had committed to shoot 4 episodes down at Portmeirion for the month of September. All eyes are watching us from the studio. You know, everyone's second-guessing.
As one can imagine, a lot of head-scratching occurred following the death of the mechanical rover.
The rover to me had to be a sort of almost, it had to be an abstract sort of thing. It represented sort of bureaucracy. It represented that nameless, faceless lot out there that tell you what to do and how to do it and when you should do it.
And we were sitting outside with 2 very large gin and tonics and talking about what we're going to do about Rover. And I always believe in miracles, because I know I just went like that. It was 10 o'clock at night, and I just went like that. And all I could see was these white things up in the sky. And I said, Pat, what's one of those? And he looked up and he went, you look like balloons. And we both kind of looked at each other and went, whoa.
A van load of balloons, all potential rovers, soon arrived at Portmeirion.
So we ended up buying many different sizes of balloons, filled them up with oxygen, and they looked pathetic. They were like blah, 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 heavy, lifeless, no shape to them.
The big problem was that a balloon full of air was a very soggy beast. If it was full of helium, it went straight up. So it was a question of getting the right mixture.
And then the prop man said, well, let me put a fishing wire on it, which we did. And suddenly we could pull this thing around all over the place and no one could see the fishing wire. And it worked.
You had those tied to Pat, if you remember, and I was using those on my fishing pole, and we did a lot of the stuff in reverse. We had everybody walking backwards and so on and so forth to make the balloons work correctly.
Rover, the most iconic image of the prisoner, was ready to terrorise.
But then it works, and you think, are they going to buy this? Is the audience and the studio going to buy a white balloon? You know?
The episode Arrival signalled Rover's first appearance in Portmeirion. With the help of some fine fishing wire, the apparition made its spectacular entry in front of a startled number 6. As terrifying as the sight was, the sound effects accompanying it were somewhat disappointing. These heavy breathing noises were re-edited at a later date, replaced with a recording of a monastic choir and a man screaming his head off. As self-contained as Portmeirion was for the series' exteriors, interiors were going to have to be equally spectacular.
Well, it was influenced very heavily by Portmeirion itself, wasn't it? So,
yes, but Portmeirion, as you know, is Mediterranean architecture, whereas when we came indoors, it was all way out futuristic, almost going back to the days of Fritz Lang, you know, in M, you know, sort of everything was very stylized and symbolic.
So Jack Champagne was brilliant because he designed the control room for number 2 with a backing that could be changed in various colors, and he redressed that room over and over again for nearly every major set in the film. It was like an art exhibition room, it was the council meeting room, it was the examination room with the psychologist, it was the room where they were, the observation room. I mean, it was brilliant. So we could change that room overnight.
So the only thing that was a sort of brainchild of Hugh and Pat was, I don't know who thought of it, was the symbol of the penny farthing bicycle, which is more or less a heraldic.
No, he is responsible more than anybody for the style of the series, most certainly.
So that was completely almost like a harmonising note with everything futuristic. You've got this going right back in time.
Although it was never decided as such during filming, Vincent Tilsley's episode, The Chimes of Big Ben, became the second episode of the series to be broadcast.
The phone rang. It was George Markstein, who I had only slightly met before, on the committee of the Writers' Guild, I remember. That's where I knew him from. And he lived quite close. He said, and I knew nothing about The Prisoner. I hadn't heard of it. This was very early days. And he said they were doing this new series with Patrick McGoohan. And he told me just a slight bit over the phone. He said, it'd be better if he said, you don't happen to be free, do you? This was in the morning, mid-morning. And he was only about 10 minutes walk away. Not that George Markstein would walk for 10 minutes uphill. I'm sure he got a taxi. But he was with me in no time at all. So we sat down in my flat and talked about it. And he said, can you think up a story? And then he went home. Well, I had a story by that afternoon, actually, because he told me that when he told me that the prisoner, that McGoohan, goes back to his flat, his house in London, and is gassed and is unconscious, then he wakes up and he thinks he's back home, until he opens the curtains and bears the village. He's somewhere else. And I liked that. I thought, what can I do with that? And what occurred to me was supposing that we did an episode in which a very similar thing happened at the end, instead of as well as at the beginning. Well, same beginning. But at the end, he's somewhere where they played the same trick.
The script had to be tweaked slightly to incorporate the new identity of Rover, while other sequences were also revised.
I thought, when I wrote my script, I was a good boy. I did exactly what he said. I gave Rover a big part in it. So part of the plotting had to be, what are we going to use Rover for? And you've seen the episode, and it's where the girl swims out to sea. That's why I had her swimming out to sea like that, so that Rover could skim along the waves with its blue light, drag her in, bring her ashore, and then just regurgitate her. You'll probably remember that when she did swim out to sea, and it got her, that bit was all right, because what you see is her face pressed against the rubber and a lot of swishy stuff going like that. And it was suitably surreal for you not to really know what's going on, but it looked good. But once it dragged her to the beach and had to land her, how's it going to do that? You see, because the original Rover was going to regurgitate her out, but they couldn't do that with a weather balloon. So they had to kit it with a couple of little weather balloons too. It kind of popped while it was out at sea. And she was lying like this with the big bit here and the two little bits there. And it really did look rather comical rather than sinister by that time. But it was all they could do, you see.
During 1967, The Prisoner shared studio space with Stanley Kubrick's epic 2001: A Space Odyssey. As The Chimes of Big Ben originally required a shot of the cosmos, librarian Tony Sloman employed a little subterfuge to capture some astral landscapes.
And we needed a shot of the sky. And as librarian, I tried to get this from the library we were using, which was World Background. But of course, the night sky is a very hard thing to shoot. Who had lots of stars and lots of night sky and was on our very doorstep? You're right, Mr. Kubrick. But Mr. Kubrick wouldn't lend, understandably, anything. So through the good services of Doug Trumbull and Con Pedersen, I borrowed, unofficially, a night sky shot, and with production manager John O'Connor and the second unit cameraman, I actually shot it on a stage at MGM, and that's what you see in what I think is called the triquetrum sequence in the alternative Chimes of Big Ben.
The triquetrum, a makeshift Greek device for discovering one's whereabouts. Not 100% accurate, but on the other hand, not too bad.
That's actually a shot that was a match shot, I'm afraid, that was prepared for 2001: A Space Odyssey. And I could never really talk about that while Stanley Kubrick was still alive.
Sharing the cast space in Chimes was the imposing figure of Leo McKern. The Australian's presence was one of the series' highlights, his raffish style complementing McGowan's confrontational presence brilliantly.
When he called me, you're a funny little fucker, aren't you? And I thought, oh, it's going to be that sort of relationship, unfortunately. And that was said in a bar when we were drinking, before we even started the series.
With actress Nadia Gray playing an Eastern Bloc dissident, the episode touched on the Cold War paranoia of the period.
Has it ever occurred to you that you're just as much a prisoner as I am?
Ah, my dear chap, of course, I know too much. We're both lifers. I am definitely an optimist. That's why it doesn't matter who number one is. It doesn't matter which side runs the village.
It's run by one side or the other.
Oh, certainly. But both sides are becoming identical. What, in fact, has been created? An international community.
But I was putting in things about the Cold War and about the two sides being the same. And so on. That was revolutionary stuff to say, and you wouldn't get that in many scripts in a pop series like that. So I could see the opportunity to do that. And I remember wondering when I was writing the script whether they'd let me get away with some of the lines that I put in it.
A perfect blueprint for world order. When the sides facing each other suddenly realize that they're looking into a mirror, they will see that this is the pattern for the future.
The whole Earth as the village.
That is my hope.
And there's a scene in The Chimes at Big Ben where I wrote it that here's this girl Nadia, she could be an agent on their side who's conning him, or she could be the real thing he doesn't know. And he's got to find out. And he's reached the point where he thinks she probably is the real thing. So he wants to say some things to her that he doesn't want, because he knows they're being bugged everywhere. He doesn't want them to hear. It's all right if they see their lips move up in the control gallery, but he doesn't want to hear. So he brings the radio out. And he gets ever so close to her, and in fact gives her a bit of a kiss to make it look as though he's fallen in love with her. It's not a sexy scene. It's a man being very crafty, a spy, doing what a spy would do. But McGowan wouldn't kiss her. And he simpers instead and waves this strange radio about to stop them hearing. And honestly, it wouldn't look as daft to other people as it looked to me, because writers are always more sensitive about their own scripts, but it looked ridiculous to me. And I was just amazed that a professional actor would not do what a professional actor should do, which is do the story. This is a man who would do that. You don't let your personal prudishness get in the way. But he certainly did, it seemed.
While Arrival revealed the extent of the village's reach, Chimes of Big Ben explored Number 6's independent spirit and ingenuity. While Portmeirion is the most memorable location of The Prisoner, actually the bulk of the series was filmed at the Elstree-based studios. One episode that relied heavily on studio sequences was Anthony Skeen's A, B and C. Originally entitled Play in 3 Acts, A, B and C revealed the lengths the village would go to extract the reasons behind Number 6's resignation. The series never shied away from tackling controversial issues, and A, B and C mined the dreamscape of hallucinogenic drugs.
We're talking about the 60s here, you know, everything was changing. We're coming up to 68 when there were riots in universities. The whole of Paris was sat in by the Sorbonne, and everything was changing, and it was kind of bubbling.
The music is changing. We're talking about the time of Sgt. Pepper. The whole, how can I put it? The drug culture is emerging.
There was a lot of similarities in the whole show about what was going on in the world, and that's why people got angry with the show, because they'd have to think about it.
Oh, we were aware of it, but it was not as strong as today. People were wiser at that time. 40 years ago, they were wiser, and then there was not so much of that.
But you know, nobody in the general public was as filled in as we are now about how things go on and who's keeping an eye on whom and what is MI6 up to and what are MI... But now, you know, we're much more aware that there is a kind of watchdog around and, kind of savvy to it. But the general public wasn't in the 60s, and certainly as it developed, if they were around, they just got flowers pushed in their faces and twirly skirts in front of their noses. I mean, flower power did its best to get rid of that kind of formality.
So this is your wonder drug?
Yes. 3 doses. And that's the absolute limit.
Why?
3's dangerous enough. 4 would kill him.
And and I say this respectfully, to the common person, it was probably a little over their heads. And when people don't understand things, they retaliate, they reject, because they feel a certain fear that they haven't got the education to understand what that actually meant. I mean, you have to listen to the prisoner, you have to listen to the words, and you have to think about it.
We talk about psychedelia and all the influence of the Beatles at the time, because, of course, we chose one of the Beatles' famous numbers of All You Need Is Love to use on the very last episode. So you've got a huge influence going on there. And I would say that the whole of The Prisoner was almost an examination of that to some degree, of all the various things that were psychological tricks that were being played at the time. So it was looking into each of these. In fact, it had to look into this because that's where its depth came from. It was really a sort of examination of the society at the time.
It was something different. There was something different in the air at the time. And in a very strange sort of way, it wasn't the so-called swinging London films like Smashing Time that encapsulated that feeling, that flavour of the period. It was The Prisoner, and it was unique. And we were seeing things in The Prisoner that you'd never seen before.
Good evening.
Courtesy of some clever back projection and elegant sets back at MGM, Number 6 was transported into the glamorous quarters of Parisian society during A, B and C. Perfectly cast as the seasoned party host was Catherine Cath, who slotted into the role of Madame Engadine with characteristic ease.
I'm so happy you are here.
You look as wonderful as ever.
I should, but it cost. Oh, yeah.
And then I remember one day we were on the set and I was on the top of the ladder. I don't know why I was doing there. And then I said, be careful, the boss is coming. And I think he's smiling. So, and Pat was in the corner and he was smiling. 6 titties smiling.
Stand firm upon this electoral platform and speak a word without fear. The word is freedom.
The episode Free for All presented a brilliant parody on the futility of political systems. The coercion of Number 6 into running for office was yet another stunt by the authorities to browbeat their prized captive. Free for All is significant as it was one of 3 stories to be written by McGoohan for the series. It was also the first to take on a deeper allegorical significance. With Portmeirion providing the perfect location for Free for All, the episode is visually one of the most attractive episodes of the series, as well as offering the strongest hint of where that series was heading.
You seem to be doing pretty well.
As viewers reeled from the raw emotion of Free for All, the next episode scheduled for screening was The Schizoid Man. With yet another metaphor for the depersonalization of the individual, the concept split Number 6's character in 2 in a bid to confuse his reality.
What the devil?
We had some really good people working, and the director, Pat Jackson, was a lovely man and did a very, very good job with us, and quite a complicated piece of work. Doing all this mind reading with the cards and so on, which was not particularly easy, I can tell you, especially with Patrick going, now! And then you go, oh my goodness, what is it? And you have to come back with the right card and so on. And then he'd go, now.
Now!
A cross.
Right. Now?
3 wavy lines.
It's a lot.
While it's been well documented that McGowan maintained a frosty distance from his female co-stars, he instantly warmed to Jane Merrow's assertive persona on and off set.
I got on very, very well with him. I think, I don't know why. I mean, we connected very well, and I think he liked me, and I think he respected what I did. And I think he could, to some extent, relax with me because, you know, we were just two professionals working together, and I think he liked that.
As the series was seemingly challenging every pillar of the establishment, it was no surprise that the subject of education would come under scrutiny. Louis Griefer's script, The General, utilised heavy symbolism to highlight the potential abuses of education.
I had this idea about what was happening to education, and what is happening to education, frankly, that it is becoming a rote thing, with less and less learning involved. And it occurred to me that this was a very good idea for the series.
My phone rang on a Friday night, and a voice said, "Peter, this is Patrick." He didn't say Patrick whom, but I knew who it was. And he said, "I've fired the director. We're going to start all over again on Monday, and you are directing." So I said, "But I'm now a producer with the BBC. I can't get time off just like that."
Allow me to introduce the General.
So he said, "Right, who do I speak to get you off?" I said, "Well, I don't know, but Sidney Newman is the head of drama, but I doubt he'll let me off." So, of course, Patrick spoke to Sidney Newman, and I don't know what pressure he made or what inducement he offered, but sure enough, on the Saturday morning, there was a script waiting for me, delivered by motorcycle on the doorstep.
That mass of circuits, my dear fellow, is as revolutionary as nuclear fission. No more wastage in schools, no more tedious learning by rote. A brilliantly devised course, delivered by a leading teacher, subliminally learned, checked and corrected by an infallible authority. And what have we got? A row of cabbages.
Apart from technical things, which always went on there, no, it was practically the script I wrote. But I don't think that's true of other screenwriters.
I didn't see any other episode, and I didn't see any of the other directors' work. All I was handed was a script and get on with it.
Dance of the Dead, the third of Anthony Skeen's scripts for the series, came up for completion. For reasons best known to himself, McGowan took an instant dislike to the first cut of the episode and insisted that it be shelved indefinitely.
I'd done a couple of films in the meantime, and water had gone under the bridge. And when I saw him next, I said, "Dance of the Dead." I said, "I had a look at that the other day." I said, "I think it's very good." He said, "Oh, you think so?" He said, "Well, go through all the outtakes and things and see what you can do with it." So I did, and really, what had happened is that one of the end scenes hadn't been shot, and I managed to overcome that with a few wild tracks and stretched one or two other things out. And I got the reputation for the man who saved Dance of the Dead.
With Smith's help, Dance of the Dead was reinstated. With brilliant performances from Mary Morris and Norma West, it remains one of the series' most popular stories.
Why haven't I a costume?
Perhaps because you don't exist. Quite enchanting. Little Bo Peep.
Who always knows where to find her sheep.
Oh, you must cheer him up, my dear. Dance. It's a special night.
We hope so. Dance.
With the spectre of transmission dates fast approaching, the difficulty in maintaining the exceptional quality was beginning to take its toll. In the episode It's Your Funeral, the concept showed signs of flagging. The directors Don Chaffee and Peter Graham Scott had moved on to other projects, and Robert Asher, best known for his work on Norman Wisdom films, took over.
Bob Asher knocked on my dressing room door the first day, and he said, "Oh, hello," very quiet man. "Hello, Darren. We've never worked before, but this is interesting, isn't it?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Tell me something. I know I shouldn't say this as a director, but do you know what this is all about?" I said, "I have not the slightest idea. It is Chinese." He said, "Well, they've told me that I can now see the first episode, and that will explain everything. So look, have a cup of coffee. I'll see the first episode, then I'll come back and tell you what it's all about." So I had a cup of coffee. He came back and I said, "Well, Bob, what's it about?" He said, "I have no idea." And I didn't know what was going on. I couldn't understand. I didn't know anything. I didn't know what was going on. I had no idea what the office was about, what I was supposed to be doing as, the real number two. So he was actually a totally confused man.
She was given a drug yesterday, one of the new super strength mopropamates that we've developed. She doesn't know anything about it, of course.
Yesterday?
Well, the drug remains dormant until triggered by the nervous system, and then it releases itself to the desired quantities to produce instant tranquility or, temporary oblivion.
But why?
Well, in anticipation of number 6 throwing her out, which he was about to do.
So the number 2 that I play, if you ever see him, is played in total confusion. He has no idea what is going on. And McGowan came up to me and he said, "This is not a comedy. Why are you doing it? You look like you don't know what it's about." I said, "I've got no bloody idea what it's about. You tell me what it's about." He said, "Well, I'm not sure." So I played him totally confused.
But just now and again you had somebody like Darren Nesbitt, who I've worked with in other series, and he had a wonderful eccentricity which I thought was quite compelling. I don't know whether he would like a compliment, but I think he was compelling because he was strange. But I think he wanted that to come across, whereas Pat McGowan I think he just wanted to get the story straight.
Ah, number 6, my dear fellow. Do come in. Do come in. Shall I order coffee, or would you prefer some tea?
Forget the amenities. This is not a social call.
While the prisoner could barely claim to have any inherent love interest, the beautiful Annette Andre was brought in as number 6's co-conspirator on It's Your Funeral. McGowan usually remained remote from his female co-stars, and Annette Andre was no exception.
I hated every single minute of it. Really, I think it was down to Patrick, totally. Patrick, well, it's no secret that I just loathed Patrick from the minute I started. I tried to be nice, and he doesn't work with actresses at all well.
What are you doing here?
I was just going to wake you up.
You have. Who are you?
He had a crashing row with Bob Asher and tore him apart in front of the entire studio, crew, everything. And in my set of ethics, you don't do that to an actor, and you certainly don't do it to your director. And that just, then the next day I went to my agent and said, "I can't stand this." However, I finished the whole thing, but I hated that. I hated the whole thing.
I think he was having a bit of a nervous breakdown, to be honest. He was terribly uptight, terribly. And one day, 2 or 3 days into shooting, he had an enormous row with the director on the set, in front of everybody, screaming. And he sacked him and took over the direction.
While Annette Andre did her best to contain McGowan's confrontational mind games, actor Mark Eden had his own, more physically challenging encounter with the series' leading man.
Let me have that. Out of my way.
Stupidly, in those days, because I was quite fit in those days, I used to do a lot of my own stunts. I'd done lots with other people, Roger Moore and people like that. What I wasn't prepared for was doing a fight with with Patrick because all the others they didn't take it that seriously, but he took it very seriously. And there was a bit where he had to get on top of me and strangle me. And I had to push him off. And then we rolled down. I can't remember how it worked, but we rolled down a hill over and over and over and over, a slope rather, not a hill. And he got on top of me, and he was really strangling me. There was a way of doing it, without actually hurting him. And I looked up, and I could see these mad eyes looking down at me, and I thought, he's gone, and his face was contorted with rage, and he was like, you're going to, all this. And he's a big man, and I had to push him off. Unfortunately, in those days, I was quite fit. I used to go to the gym all the time. But it took me every effort, every ounce of strength I had to push him off.
Following on from the charades of It's Your Funeral, A Change of Mind was a more coherent exposition of Number 6's alienation. The episode benefited greatly from an ingenious script by Roger Parks that explored the controversial landscape of psychiatry and conditioning.
I think I rang George, but anyway, we got on the phone together, and I then had an idea about them pretending that they were giving him a lobotomy operation, and they were going to isolate his frontal lobes, which would have the effect, and this was well documented, of releasing his inhibitions and his moral scruples, so that having conned him into thinking that he'd had a frontalectomy, a lobotomy, he would then yield his secrets. George was jumping about. He was squeaking on the other end of the phone with excitement, because he could see that this was a good device for a prisoner episode. He saw that immediately.
McGoohan was completely consumed by his workload on The Prisoner, and he had little time for anyone who wasn't equally committed to the demands of the series.
And the next bombshell that came along was that I found he'd sacked the director and was going to do it himself. He did this with several of the other scripts, I think, but I like to think that that he saw in this script quite a lot of potential for clever direction, and he fancied doing it himself. But whichever, I was appalled, I was horrified, because I was working at the BBC. I was used to working with actors a lot by then, and as far as I was concerned, he was just an egomaniac star, and I was sure he was going to screw up on the direction. When he took over as director, did so under the name of Joseph Surf, although actually none of us was aware of this until the actual transmission. It was a fairly big ego trip for him, I believe. I know I keep using that word, ego, but it's pertinent, I believe. But it was also effective, and I felt that he overall directed my episode extremely well.
Of the frontal lobes. Lanolin barrier to minimize external cell breakdown and subsequent scar tissue.
It has been said to me that that this is one of the darker episodes in the series. Rather somber theme and not much fun in it, by comparison with the other episodes, or most of the other episodes. And I find I don't have a problem with that. I think I would rather be remembered for that.
With the requisite package of 13 episodes in the can, production on the first series came to a close. Either through fatigue or the lure of other projects, the bulk of The Prisoner's production team moved on to other work. Conspicuous by his absence was script editor George Markstein, who left deeply unhappy at how McGoohan was taking credit for every aspect of the programme's creation.
When egomania took over, when McGoohan was everything. When McGoohan was writing, was conceiving, was directing, and didn't know where he was going.
With the future of The Prisoner in limbo, Lou Grade called McGoohan in for discussions on how to either extend or conclude the series. While numbers such as 26 or even 30 episodes have been bandied about, it's evident that neither McGoohan nor David Tomlin had the will or stamina to sustain the production's pace. As a result, a further 4 episodes were lined up to bring the story to a close.
I felt there was a danger of the series becoming claustrophobic, which it should have done anyway by its nature, but trying to think of ideas to get it out of the village, but keep it in the village.
Whatever hold The Prisoner had had over McGoohan, it was now becoming apparent that the actor was starting to look beyond the confines of the show. Given his total commitment to the series, people were surprised to learn that he'd accepted a role in Alistair MacLean's Ice Station Zebra. Shooting on the film would take place in America, and Nigel Stock was drafted in to take the lead in the episode entitled Face Unknown.
And I don't think I even got the idea out when the meeting happened, because my memory is that they came in straight away. I think I said as much as, well, I've got an idea. And whoever it was, perhaps David Tomlin, said, well, just before you go any further, Vincent, we've got a bit of a problem, and we wonder if you could do something about it, if you could think in this way. Patrick has to go to America for a while, and it would be amazingly helpful if somebody could come up with a story where Patrick wasn't in. Wouldn't it be nice to write Hamlet without the prince? And also, Hamlet without the prince mustn't be in Denmark either. They wanted it not to be in Portmeirion, because that was going to give them all sorts of advantages. I don't know what they were. So I've been asked to do right now. The two things is Portmeirion and Patrick McGoohan. That's The Prisoner. And I was to write a script without either of them.
I'd appreciate knowing my duties as soon as possible.
You've no idea why you're here.
All I know is I was sent here by the highest authority.
You were indeed. You should feel very proud.
I'm gratified, certainly.
And the only thing I could think up was this mind swap thing. I didn't like it from the start. I was writing a script I didn't believe in. And that's a nasty thing to do. I mean, I've never been married to somebody I hated, but I should think that it's as much the same feeling. I think you don't want to be in this relationship.
The actor who took on Patrick's body, I don't think worked quite well. He was quite a good actor, I think, but I don't think it worked all that well in that sequence.
The storyline played with the concept of mind transference, but McGoohan's presence was sorely missed. On his return from America, he was reportedly unimpressed with what he saw and demanded a recut to salvage the story. The revisions were extensive. Even the title was changed to Do Not Forsake Me, Oh My Darling.
And although it was the same story that I'd given to them, the actual script was that there wasn't a scene left in it that hadn't been at least partially rewritten, and usually completely rewritten. I have said in the past, and I think without justice, that they turned a not very good script into an even worse script. And I don't think that's quite true. But I think they turned a not very good script into a slightly different not very good script.
Thank you, Colonel. Your help has been invaluable.
I trust I've been of service?
Yes. You'll be suitably rewarded. Your helicopter is waiting for you.
With script editor Mark Stein now gone, McGoohan and Tomlin canvassed their colleagues at MGM for new ideas. Ian Rakoff was one who rallied to the call.
The talk was going around that they were going to expand the series and they were looking for fresh writers.
And so word got round to those of us who were in the cutting rooms to saying, have you got any ideas for it? And Tony Sloman and Ian Rakoff and myself each offered one or two basic ideas for it. And fortunately, Ian Rakoff got off the ground and flew.
He'd enjoyed his time assisting the editing team on the series, but was keen to expand into writing. His eagerness to help earned him an audience with McGoohan.
But he put the fear of God into me. I mean, I was hopeless, useless, and he was getting more and more angry. And it's not that he's such a big man, which he is, but he is a vast presence. I mean, that's part of what makes the series. I mean, and so he was like swaying and swinging and walking around me and banging the desk. Oh, and he picked up a briefcase. That's right, and he started lecturing me on I should be writing about a briefcase or something. Then he picked up a bottle of Malvern water, and it was all totally incomprehensible. Then I thought, if I get out of here alive, I'm lucky. That's all I want now. I don't want to be a writer. I don't want to have anything more to do with this kind of mania. I got it. But will I get out alive? I was absolutely frightened out of my wits. I'd never seen anything like this. And then eventually I was there quite a while, I don't know how long, but he sort of sank into his chair behind the desk and said, all right, you can go.
Although Rakoff received a screen credit on Living in Harmony, director David Tomlin and even stuntman Frank Mayer were soon quick to register their input on the episode.
And anyhow, I worked with David for a bit, and then he said he didn't need me anymore. Like months later, I got an invite to come see the film, and he'd taken the main credit and just put original story by Ian Rakoff and David Tomlin. And I said, and I wanted to see McGowan when I was at the studio, and Tomlin said, you can't see him. He's too big, he doesn't have time to see you. And I never saw McGowan again.
If viewers were led to expect a slightly easier ride on their senses with Living in Harmony, they were in for a shock. McGowan even insisted that a Western movie landscape would replace the familiar opening title sequence. Courtesy of some elaborate sets, hallucinogenic drugs, and a bizarre plot, Living in Harmony was the Village's most ambitious attempt to break number 6. CBS, the series broadcaster in America, would even pull Living in Harmony from its schedules.
And they didn't show it in France either, because it was too, I don't know, the drugs, rebellion. It's some kind of, it's because it's a Western, so it's more American than the others. But apparently it terrified somebody. So I think I was rather pleased by that.
While the episode's implied pacifist stance has been cited, it was the overt references to hallucinogenic drugs that prompted its censorship. The ban hardly affected the continuity of the run, as the following episode, The Girl Who Was Death, was to take an even wilder tangent. With every avenue of the prisoner now seemingly exhausted, The Girl Who Was Death offered some welcome relief from the heavier issues. Ostensibly a children's story read by number 6 to confuse his observers, many have argued that the story was originally conceived for Danger Man. It's likely that the demand for scripts resulted in it being tailored for the prisoner. Adding weight to the John Drake connection, Christopher Benjamin, a veteran of 2 appearances on The Prisoner, was asked back to play Potter, a role he'd assumed on the last series of Danger Man.
Potter. And this has led a lot of people to say, oh, well, my record shop owner in Danger Man was called Potter. Potter's been brought back into The Prisoner.
Is he, Potter?
It's our former Siberia.
What was the Colonel up to?
Dr. Snips.
Well, this was never mentioned to me. I mean, Patrick would have said, I want you to be the same man. I saw you as Potter. And quite obviously, I think if you watch it, that I'm not the same Potter. Maybe I'm his brother or something like that. But there's this theory that Potter was in the Danger Man and came back into The Prisoner. I don't hold with that at all. Nobody told me.
With time gradually slipping away, a conclusion to The Prisoner had to be established. As befits the frenetic nature of the production, the penultimate episode had been shot months before an ending had even been written. With only the inevitability that number 6 would meet his nemesis, number 1, Once Upon a Time prepared the territory for The Prisoner's finale.
I think Patrick knew exactly what he was doing. And he had a total concept of the thing.
But then we shot an episode called Degree Absolute, which was like episode number 6, which became episode number 16 and retitled Once Upon a Time. And episode 6 was to me, the prequel to the end. So it makes me think about maybe Pat somewhere felt that's where it was going to end.
With Leo McKern reviving his role as number 2, the episode is a glorious two-handed battle of wits where only one man could survive.
1 week. 1 teeny-weeny week, my boy. Neither of us can leave. Till death do us part. And I brought it on myself. Who knows?
The intensity of Once Upon a Time provoked a powerful performance from McGowan, who towered over the episode with his presence. Totally engrossed with the dynamics of the story, McGowan drove McKern to the absolute limit.
And he was almost impossible to work with. A dreadful bully. And always shouting and screaming and yelling about the place and hurrying up and saving money.
Once Upon a Time, this was about 2 people going into a dark room. And it was a locked-off set. I mean, it was only a camera crew in there and a few electricians and grips. And after a few days, it was about Patrick wanting to break number 2 down. But then the character took over, and Patrick wanted to break the actor down.
Why did you resign?
I can't tell you that, sir.
Was it secret?
Secret, sir?
And confidential?
No, sir.
Top secret?
No, sir.
Top secret?
State secret.
Yes.
State secret, sir.
Top state secret confidential. Why did you resign?
They'd brought the thing to an extraordinary pitch. Brendan Stafford sent one of his assistants in and said, to say, if you have any time, come in for God's sake and watch this pair. They're no longer acting, they're our number 6 and number 2.
State confidential secret.
And so I could see Leo fighting for his acting life on the set. I mean, this intensity went on for 8 or 9 days, and the characters took over.
I mean, it was unbelievable to watch. It was real. Suddenly the whole never thing disappeared.
The demands of filming led McKern to suffer a nervous breakdown partway through the shoot.
No, I used to get very depressed. I remember I used to lie in my dressing room mainly. In the short times we had off, and worry and be depressed and very silent.
Production was curtailed until the actor was fit to return.
It was a shock to me because I didn't realize how roles could take over the actors, how they could become the role they were portraying and take it to its complete, just to play that role out and actually be quite dangerous. And we had to be very careful about how we finished the show with Leo, because I didn't want an actor dying on the show. But that's how intense it got.
Certainly, when one is shouted at, it doesn't inspire one to do anything except withdraw into oneself.
Kill! Sure, boy. You can do it all, boy. You're the one-man band. You won't step over the threshold because you're scared. Go on, kill!
But that was great fun, I must say, even though it was agony.
For all the creativity expended on the series, there was still a final episode to be written.
Congratulations.
McGowan had made an attempt at it while flying back from Hollywood after work on Ice Station Zebra, but wasn't happy with the results.
We shall need the body for evidence. What do you desire?
Number 1.
I'll take you.
With less than a couple of weeks before the screening deadline, McGowan locked himself away in a room at MGM, emerging 36 hours later with the completed script, entitled Fallout.
I promised them there'd be an ending because Pat told me there'd be an ending. And I saw him on one occasion, and it was getting near the 17th episode, and I said, Pat, are you sure there's going to be an ending? He said, yes. And then he came to me at a later period and said, Lou, I just cannot find an ending. I've got too confused with the project. And I thought it was very nice of him to come straight out to me and admit it. And I told the networks, we have no ending.
I don't know how I knew what was going on, because when you cut the sequences, they were so different. But when you put them together, somehow they all gelled, and how Patrick could have known that he could do that and that they would work, I don't know.
I think that the whole unit wondered about it. I'm sure that they, those that I spoke to, the cameraman and the operator, couldn't understand it and wondered how I was going to get out of it.
I feel that the Swart Kid Patrick is making Christendom.
With McGoohan barely sleeping with the pressure of closing the series, his instructions became more and more bizarre.
He came into my cutting room, that was during the last episode, and said he'd like to run it on the Moviola. And he sat here over my shoulder, and it was only quite a small viewing machine, and he kept saying, forward, back, on about a 20-foot length of film, back, forward, and that went on for an hour until I turned to him in desperation. I said, what are you trying to say here? What are you trying to say? And he said, I don't know, go forward, go back, forward and back. And, in the end, I had tears running down my face because I didn't know what to do.
I'd never worked on anything like that. Even playing strange Hamlets at the Royal Shakespeare for Peter Brook was nothing like Fallout. Fallout was an experience that took a long time to get over in every sense of the word. And it was a great experience, working with a very brilliant man.
Hello.
Give it to me, baby! Confess!
Oh, Dad, I'm your baby, Dad. You owe your baby something, Daddy.
Confess!
The bones is yours, Dad. They came from you, my daddy.
Confess! Now you hip.
Hip, Dad. Hip.
Confess!
And a hip bone.
Confess!
And a thigh bone.
Confess!
Shin bone, knee bone.
Confess!
Backbone, all yours, Dad.
Most people expected a conventional ending, but it wasn't a conventional series anyway. So the ending, I think, was in style with the series.
So you can make up your own mind?
Well, yeah, it's sort of like an abstract, and you can see things in it, make your own analogies.
Fallout exploded across the screen with an intensity never before witnessed on television. The revelation that number 1 was indeed number 6's mirror image was a massive disappointment to the majority of viewers. But the series had left itself with nowhere to go. That said, the ending was totally in keeping with the style of the series.
I will not be pushed, filed, stamped, indexed, briefed, debriefed, or numbered. I will not be pushed, filed, stamped, indexed, briefed, debriefed, or numbered. My life is my own. I
It's one of those great shows where it's one of those very rare television shows where it's like a great painting. Everybody brings their own interpretation to it. A piece of music. What is this piece of music about? Well, to you, it's a descriptive piece of music about the sea at Aldborough. To somebody else, it's death and destruction. To somebody else, it's air on a folk song. I mean, what you see is what you get out of it. That's why it's such a unique and extraordinary series.
When it was transmitted, the buzz was everywhere. On the buses, on the trains, you met people in the streets. They were very disappointed.
When the idea was firmly adopted, I think I said at some stage to Patrick, isn't this a strange end for a pacifist, anti-paranoia program? And he said, well, maybe it makes some terrible sort of logic.
I think the whole nation was disappointed because number one wasn't revealed.
I think everyone was expecting to see a number one. That's probably why they felt betrayed. They wanted to see a guy there with a machine like, I'm number one. Sean Connery sitting there. I controlled this whole show. It wasn't written that way, and so that becomes very intellectual.
Said it, the non-conclusion. I think it was an absurd pantomime. I mean, you tell me what it means.
I think McGoon didn't know how to end it. And we had this highly stylized and weird array of people doing strange things. They could almost have got Salvador Dali in on, designing things. It was very surreal. And in a way, that let him off the hook of not knowing how to end it.
I think it was a bit of gross self-indulgence by somebody who was fed up with the whole thing and wanted to get out of it and wanted to go out in a blaze of something or other.
But I don't think anybody quite knew what it was about. And this is half its secret now, nobody quite knows what it's about. It's a totally enigmatic series. Whether Patrick knew what it was about, I'm not sure. I think he did. I think he had a vision.
I think that The Prisoner was about number 6 being imprisoned within his own self.
Such was the reaction to Fallout, switchboards were jammed with callers registering their complaints. The following week, outraged viewers reportedly attacked McGowan in the street. While The Prisoner proved a remarkable viewing experience for the public, those closely involved with the series walked away with a variety of emotions.
I'm not at all surprised that people still watch The Prisoner, because I still think it has validity for today.
It's something for every generation. It doesn't date in any way.
When all my friends, the actors, say, oh, Catherine, you're so lucky to be in it.
I would never have come back in a million years. Markstein would never have asked me, because he knew I'd say, you're joking. I don't need the money. Why should I have all these problems?
To think that 40 years later one is still working and answering questions about something one did 40 years ago is, I feel quite proud of.
While the production crew moved on to other projects, McGowan left England for California, where he remains to this day in quiet seclusion. Although delighted that the series provoked so much controversy and debate, the actor has rarely commented on the series, preferring individuals to make up their own mind on its meaning.
It has a fascination about it, a definite fascination.
I mean, just think, I think I must maybe 8, maximum 12 weeks on that, and here I am 40 years later, having dined out on it. People are queuing up to sign books.
It's still ahead of its time. I mean, I still think it's going to have, with a new release and a new audience, and that's the wonderful thing about these sort of shows, it's going to have a whole new following. There's no question about that.
It kind of went into an area that I think nobody had really gone into. And that's why I admire so much, the people that kind of said, let's go with it, and him for thinking the idea up in the first place.
I believe it's becoming more and more relevant today than any other time. So in other words, we're having this conversation 40 years on. I suspect other people, although I might not be around in another 40 years' time, I think people will still be examining it, a bit like they'll be examining Alice in Wonderland.
In an age where covert surveillance is at an all-time high, the prophetic warnings that the series made are very much a reality today. But beyond that, the quest for each individual to search for personal freedom will be around as long as there is human life. Perhaps that's why The Prisoner will live on forever.
Where am I? In the village. What do you want? Information. Whose side are you on? That would be telling. We want information. 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 You won't get it. By hook or by crook, we will. Who are you? The new number 2. Who is number 1? You are number 6. I am not a number. I am a free man.